Hi, everyone. So excited about this session, Conversations with Meals on Wheels America members. And it's looking at the transformational journey of creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization. I'm Sharron Corle. I'm your Learning and Development Director of Meals on Wheels America. I have had the honor of being and serving you in this role for 6.5 years. I'm also on our READY committee, which is Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So this whole transformational journey and topic is very interesting to me, and we're all in this together. So I'm super excited about my fellow conversationalists today, Dori Yeater and Tracey Shamberger. And Dori, you want to tell us a couple things about yourself and your organization?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Dori Yeater. I am the Director of Development for Opportunities for Williamson and Burnet Counties. We are just north of Austin. We serve as a community action agency for the two counties, and we have programs, Meals on Wheels, Head Start, and community service programs.
So what I really found fascinating about Dori when I reached out to her to ask her if she'd be interested in engaging in this conversation is she actually does fund development in her organization, which was a really different kind of role for kind of looking at that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. And then the other part I really loved is that Meals on Wheels is only one program in the continuum of programs that they do, and how this plays out in each of those different programs is fascinating. And so Dori and I had a lovely conversation about that. And as we tell the story, I hope some of that comes out. So thank you, Dori. Tracey, you want to tell us a little bit about you and your org?
Sure, thank you. My name is Tracey Shamberger, and I am the Director of Business Development and Communications at Age Well, which is one of Vermont's area agencies on aging. And we run Meals on Wheels and other programs and supports to make sure that our older Vermonters stay at home and are supported in whatever capacity that they need us to support them. One of the things that really interested me when Sharron was just talking about Dori's experiences, I also am in fundraising. Mm-hmm. And I think it makes a lot of sense, anyone that's in communications or fundraising or really any part of the organization, to really have an understanding of what their diversity, equity, and inclusion culture is like, and how important that is internally and externally in terms of your programs. So well, nice to be here.
Well, thank you for that, Tracey. And I was going to highlight the fact that your communications role, when I wrote the original session description, Tracey said, I think you should make these couple of changes. And I said, yes, this is why I love having a communication person involved in this. They make it stronger and more clear. So thank you. And thank you both for your willingness to kind of share your story. This whole idea of social learning is so important. As a learning and development director, I always think like hearing stories and different perspectives and diverse ways of doing things is so important to how we learn. It's not just kind of people think, oh, watch a video or do this. I think also hearing lived experience and what folks have done and that real kind of lessons learned is really how we learn from each other in a network and how we learn in general, So it's so important to be able to tell our stories and be able to listen to other people's stories and see what we can glean from them to kind of improve our efforts or change our perspective or give us a different way of thinking about things. So with that, I'm going to open it up to Dori to tell us a little bit about what are you doing over there? Tell us a little bit about kind of what your journey has been like. Kind of if there's surprises along the way or really awesome things or things that didn't turn out the way that you wanted. Tell us a little bit about kind of what that's been like for y'all.
Thank you, Sharron. Yeah, so, in the past couple of years as a fund developer, I've been noticing that they've been asking a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion statements. And how does your organization feel towards that? As well as asking about the demographics of not only your clients, but your board and employees. So I've been with OWBC for about a year now, and I came from an advocacy organization where inclusion was part of our vision and mission. So I knew coming into this role that was very important to an organization. So I came in and I, asked the team, I said, well, what is our DE&I statement? And they said, well, we don't really have one as an organization, but we have one for Meals on Wheels, we have one for Head Start, and we have one for community action. And I thought, okay, all right, well, I guess I could use one of those and whatever grant funding I'm looking for and put that in, leading from, our national offices. And then I kind of started thinking a little more about it and thought, you know what, we need to create one of our own. I don't think that, if diversity is not a goal of the organization, it's just not going to happen, right? So I started talking to our senior leadership team and asking them their thoughts on this. And as we all know, in working for a nonprofit, when you come up with the idea, you take over full ownership, right? So they said, yeah, sure, run with it. Let's see what happens. So first, I thought that it was important to get, the higher level management backing me and really wanting this to create this diversity and inclusion in our organization. So what I did was I got with the senior leadership and I asked a few questions to them. I gave them a couple weeks. There are 7 questions that I asked of them. I really just wanted to get some information behind them and their thoughts. After that, I created a survey that was then sent out to our over 160 employees to really kind of get their terms and what they thought and how good of a job we're doing on diversity and equity and inclusion. And then, kind of just lost the momentum. Like all of us, we get another task on. And so this meeting today and this conversation was really cool because it's really sparked my interest again in getting this together and getting going. So Sharron, we're in the very early stages, but we've started, and that's what's exciting to me. So I think as far as next step goes within our program is to really get a DE&I committee here within our organization, getting some members from some of our other programs and our other businesses. And I think really just kind of moving forward and doing that.
So Dori, thank you for acknowledging you're just getting started. I think the fear around these issues in general is that we feel like there's a playbook that everyone else has and a one way to do it. And we just don't have that playbook. And we need to get it to figure it out. And, and I think although there's been a lot of focus around this over the past couple of years, a lot of social movements and, actually social unrest, there has been a lot of attention on this. And so really just how we all kind of look at that is very different depending on the culture of your organization, right? You're not just going to come in there and upset the apple cart of the way things are operated. And I appreciate some of the things that you shared as far as all right, we're just getting started. However, I really thought it was important to get buy-in from people on the, senior leadership team and also people in the organization. And I'm curious about the survey and the questions you asked. And did you get any pushback from your senior leadership or your, other folks that you work with, why are we doing this? Or why are you asking this question? Or kind of, was there an acceptance of it, an understanding of, why you were doing it? Or did you have some kind of surprises that you learned along the way?
Well, the good part is that I told everybody that this was required for funding, and everybody jumped straight on it. So of course they're going to answer the questions when I said. So I kind of did a little white lie there, but it all worked out in the end. And I got some really great responses. Most responses were, "Thank you for doing this. Now is the time. I'm happy to help on a committee." So there weren't many negative responses. There were we did not have 100% rate of return on the survey, and I wasn't expecting that. The rate was right around 65%, which I still thought was pretty good. That meant to me that over half of the organization knew that it was time to really make something happen when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think really to create that inclusive workplace, you need to lead by example, and ask for employee feedback. That was super important also.
Absolutely. You can't have an inclusive organization if you don't give the opportunity for people to share their opinions and ideas. So yeah, that's definitely important. And I love that 65% is a great response rate, actually. You know, Gallup poll, who we base a lot of things on, like what we talk about employee engagement, they do surveys. If they get a 33% response rate, they consider that generalizable. Now, people that work in statistics will say 65% is good. I mean, that's way better than 33. But Gallup, who we trust what they say, says 33. And I appreciate you sharing those comments from that as well, like people saying thank you. You know, all these efforts are about, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion is about creating a sense of belonging in the organization, right? And if you create a sense of belonging in the organization, like I belong here, then I'm going to give you everything I have because I feel like I can bring my best self to work, and I feel like the conditions are such that I can perform. So, you know, there's a lot of research around diversity. So people from diverse backgrounds and cultures and education and religions, you know, those different opinions and experiences actually result in more creative and collaborative teams. So tapping into that is so important. You're going to have a more successful organization because you're going to tap into more of that brilliance that your talent brings. You know, the same with equity. It's like, you know, if I feel like I'm not being treated fairly, I'm really not going to give you everything that I have, right? I'm not going to perform at 100% because I'm not valued, and Christine is, you know, treated differently than I am, even though we have the same job. So I you know, there's a little bit of barrier there. And the same with inclusivity. Like if I don't feel like I can bring myself to work, so maybe I don't work the same way Tracey works. And you know, I need to like have a lot of like deep thinking time. Sorry, I'm going to write stuff all over the place. And that's just the way I work. And that's not valued there because we're a get stuff done, do a work plan kind of organization. I'm not going to bring everything that I can. So I appreciate you sharing that and having some sense of understanding from everyone in the organization, like how valuable that is to kind of having a successful organization. And kind of building those, you're planting those seeds and having those kind of bricks and building blocks. So that's, you know, really a great perspective and, you know, to share with us. Tracey, did you have anything you wanted to add to, you know, anything?
Well, I think, you know, Dori is sort of identified sort of exactly where we started was what is our diversity, equity, and inclusion, or inclusion and belonging statement, and how are we using that to sort of guide everything we do. I happen to sit on the leadership team, and my colleagues and I look at diversity, equity, and inclusion from a culture standpoint, but also from a programmatic standpoint. I think that's also, once you sort of, you know, I think the hardest thing for us was actually getting started, because you're overwhelmed by this body of DEI work sometimes. And it's like, what does it mean? Does it mean that we're saying, yes, use pronouns? Does it mean that we are saying we are paying our staff equitably? Are we fair in our practices in hiring? It's really everything, in including how we are applying for grants and how other organizations are now sort of, quite honestly, looking very seriously at how people's DEI strategies are aligned from a funding standpoint. So everything that Dori said is sort of, you know, the reason that we sort of got started. I decided, you know, really sort of at the beginning, when leading this initiative with a couple of my colleagues, who we are starting this 2-person, 3-person committee, but planning on rolling it out to not only our staff, but to our stakeholders, to perhaps thinking about our community partners and certainly people in the community. We need that outside perspective as well. But when I first started thinking about DEI, I started getting, a little overwhelmed. And then I said, you know what, there's definitely some low-hanging fruit. What can you do now? And when should we get started? And I just said, when we should get started? Right now. And what's the very first thing that we want to do? Decide on what it is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is to us at our organization. So before we even did the survey, we wanted to identify sort of at the leadership level what our guide is. What is our definition of diversity? What is our definition of inclusion? What is our definition of equity? And then from there, we also, the lowest hanging fruit was things like create a diversity statement, put your diversity statement on your homepage really proudly, and include it in lots of different communication. Make sure you're talking about your diversity, your inclusion, your equity, and what that means to your organization. And then the other sort of low-hanging fruit that we sort of said, what can we do right away, was making sure that the language that we were using on our careers and opportunities when we were trying to recruit really reflected very intentionally calling out, inviting people to say something like applications from veterans, mature workers, individual with disabilities, LGBTQ individuals, people from diverse racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds are strongly encouraged. So really not just saying we're an equal opportunity employer, but being very specific in the language we use to be inclusive. So, and I will tell you that we are starting to see more and more people applying for positions. And I can't help but think many of those people in the past have reached out saying, what is your diversity, equity, and inclusion policy? And we didn't have a strong one, but we do now. So that's been a great boost for us.
So Tracey, you had so many good things going on there. I'm just kind of, where do I start? So first, I love that sharing the overwhelmed sense. Where do I start? There's so many things out there and so many things that need to be done. I need to look at like our hiring practices and our diversity statement and our pronouns and this and that. So that is, acknowledging that is great, because it can be overwhelming, but I think when we all talked about on our planning call, it's like you start with small bites and you see where they're Dori, hey, I'm going to start here. I think funders are asking me for this. I need to do this. And then there'll be offshoots. Where do we go from here? We built some momentum. So I think I love that. Just get started, right?
Let's do it.
Yeah, there's a fear of failure. Like, I don't know where to start. But just start,
I don't want to do this wrong, or
yeah.
I don't know enough about diversity. I'm not a diversity, inclusion, and equity expert myself. But the other thing that we did, Sharron and Dori, is we did an inventory of all of our programs, and it's amazing how much you're probably already doing. That's the great news, is when you start really looking at your programs, you start saying, who are you marketing to? Are you using diverse images? Do you have a language translator? And we were already doing so many of those things. So, I think, as Dori said, having a champion and then having people within your organization to support you at a leadership team level is essential to keeping things going. And then, I would say using your DEI statement in your strategic planning, because then, just naturally things will start to evolve as you're planning everything that you're doing in the year with DEI in mind. You don't have to do it all right now.
I loved your suggestion to do an inventory. It's so important to figure out where you are now. And also, like you said, there's probably so many things you're already doing that you're like, yes, we have things to leverage and build on. Number one, and number two, a couple of other things you mentioned is, so now we know where we're doing well. Now we know where the gaps are, and also we can prioritize. where do we have the energy and the resources and the capability and actually the desire to move things forward, right? So maybe we're not going to tackle this year because it's way too big for us. But there are smaller things, like you said, like, hey, low-hanging fruit with high impact that we could do right now. Switch up our images that we use. You know, it's not always like this type of person. Change the language in our who we're looking at to bring to our organization. You made the tent a lot bigger. You built out specific personas so that I could see myself in that. If I were a veteran or I were a person with, you know, whatever
or a mature worker, someone
mature
who's
worker,
retired,
yeah.
someone who's retired and wants to come back to work. People have so much to offer, and having that flexibility and saying, yeah, maybe we could have 2 or 3 people do a job that we can't recruit one person for. It could be two people that, you know, somebody wants to work part-time, somebody wants to work part-time. It's a wonderful, you know, opportunity for somebody, and it aligns beautifully with making sure that you're being inclusive.
And calling that out specifically, because then I see myself in that and I go, oh, okay. Equal opportunity employers sounds like, you know, whatever legal jargon. And I don't know what that means. But now I see myself in there as a mature worker, and I'm going to respond to this. And yes, they called me out specifically that they're looking for someone with my talent. So I appreciate that. That was, you know, just that whole kind of tips about the inventory. And then, you know, what is some low hanging fruit that you can immediately kind of take some action on. But Tracey, you also mentioned something really important about, you know, building this into your strategic initiatives, right? So many we think it's just going to happen passively, or who's responsible for this, you know, and who moves this forward. It's like there has to be accountability for anything to change. I mean, change just doesn't happen. And the organization is not just going to kind of adopt this without kind of some kind of strategy around it, and building some kind of framework that we can hold ourselves accountable. So can you share a little bit about kind of how you all are building that into your strategic planning or your strategy for the year, or how that?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, each departmental director is responsible for, you know, so we're talking with Meals on Wheels of America. So this is a perfect segue into, you know, you have nutrition directors. Do your nutrition directors have a goal that aligns with DEI? Does that mean serving maybe perhaps more people in rural areas, or low income, or veterans, or people who have been marginalized? Is your outreach going to, in fact, target those people very directly? That could perhaps be a goal. Someone who may, in our communications and marketing, you know, it's essential that we, again, you mentioned using images, having language translators, reaching out to community partners that you hadn't worked with before because you just hadn't worked with them in the past, but now they have the audience and individuals perhaps that they're serving, and they would love to partner with you. You just really need to dig deep and to try to find who those community partners may be. The other thing for our events team, or, you know, outreach, is making sure that we are seeking opportunities to get involved with diverse cultural groups. So if there's we have a large population, and we have a new American team at AgeWell that serves a large population of Nepali individuals. And so we are going to the Bhutanese dance, or we are going to the Pride Festival. We are getting on a float at the Pride Festival, or we are tabling at Association of Africans Living in Vermont. I mean, we are seeking, and we are telling people in our stories that we are seeking community partners where we can together do greater work if we are together, and it is very effective.
Well, I love that sense of kind of collaboration. I don't know if that's the right word, but I love like just looking for those opportunities to say, okay, I want to learn more about this. I want to be more inclusive as an organization. I don't know much about Africans living in Vermont, so I'm going to just go and, hey, what is this about, and how can how can I listen to you, and how can I learn from you to kind of have an organization that, you feel is inclusive. I know a lot of Meals on Wheels programs struggle with building relationships with specific communities that maybe, like it's kind of like my mom. She volunteers at Meals on Wheels. But she doesn't think she is would be a candidate for that, because there's people that are more deserving than myself. Not that my mom needs, but that's that mentality. And I think there's a lot of cultural communities where that is like, there's other people that are more deserving, and kind of building that relationship to say, well, actually, you're deserving, and our organization can serve you. The tent is here. But you have to build those relationships, and that trust is so important. And that sounds like what you're looking for is an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and I would say, Sharron, take a real inventory of the populations that really are in your service area. We know, as I mentioned, Nepal as being Nepali community as being a very strong presence in our community. But to your point, it's not as culturally acceptable to receive Meals on Wheels or something like that at home. So we were able to say, well, we know we want to serve this population. How can we do that so that it meets their needs? And we ended up working with a senior center and hosting and getting a Bhutanese chef and doing Bhutanese food. So we're still able to serve, we're still able to bring people together, we're still able to combat social isolation, and we're able to meet them where culturally it's acceptable for them to be able to. So those are just some, great little ways that you can, and I will tell you, one other thing I think is to invite organizations to speak to your staff, to do presentations, because then everybody gets this wonderful new education, and it just further builds that relationship. So invite people into your organizations too, to have conversations.
The education piece is so important, and I do kind of want to pivot to that for a little bit. Like, what are you all, Dori? Are you thinking about adding any kind of training or education or learning opportunities for staff so they can advance their own journey on this? Will that be a part of kind of some, now that your interest is sparked back into this, like, hey, I'm spread thin, I've got 40 different things to do, but now I'm focused on this again because I have the time. Do you think training, education, any kind of learning will be a part of that?
I think that that's a great idea. And I think that I know that there are several training sessions that you can, purchase for a small rate and, do something like that. I definitely think Tracey mentioned something that I thought was very interesting and made me feel, okay about kind of letting it dwindle down, because we are already doing so much that we don't even think about as DE&I. Another thing you mentioned, Tracey, that was very fascinating and made me think a little was the fact that you do put something in place, but it's ever evolving.
That's
right. There's always something you can add to it. There's always something that's going to be changing. I think you had some great ideas on, different cultural activities that are happening in your community. It just kind of sparked my idea of, doing a board maybe that's themed every month for something and adding all of the events that are happening in the community. That would also be some sort of education for the staff as well.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Yes, definitely. I love that idea. We do themed things every month here at Meals on Wheels America around, whatever diversity thing we're celebrating. And those are fabulous ways to share resources and knowledge and information. And, it's like the individual at an individual level, I read it and I become more knowledgeable and aware of, things that I didn't know before. And it's a fabulous way to kind of to have some passive learning happen. Yeah. And even those opportunities where you're going there, Tracey, to those communities, I think that's quite fabulous, because I'm sure you've learned a lot from individuals in the communities. The interesting thing is when you open up those opportunities, it's kind of what is known and what is unknown. What you thought you knew is not what you knew. and you might learn a lot more. I think that's this whole idea, and Dori mentioned it, is it's a journey. There is not like an endpoint. You're never going to really have an endpoint where we're perfect. Our organization is diverse, equitable, and inclusive. You know, Dori, you mentioned that you're constantly looking at that. It's that transformational aspect of you learn something new or something, you change this, or you constantly are looking at that, because it should be, you know, you're constantly kind of balancing that to create the most, you know, an organization that truly is, you know, creating that environment of belonging. So that was a kind of a good thing to remind us of, is like that there's no endpoint. You're not getting to the journey like, oh yes, I got it. I got the certification in diversity, equity, and inclusion, or I got the gold star. It's like, it's a constant effort, you know. You got to keep looking at it, because there's always things that will put that out of balance, or new information that comes into play that you're going to have to incorporate.
You know, I think
Tracy.
when you I just, you know, I was just thinking, you know, it does help. You know, I think if you can at your organization define what DEI really means, you'll find that it's sort of, it becomes your guide, and then you say, oh yeah, that makes sense. We need to do that because this fits with our diversity. Or, you know, we know that we're a very inclusive culture internally, but are we really inclusive? Does everybody else see us as being inclusive? Like, you almost have to take this bit of a shield off, because, you know, nobody wants to say that they're not diverse, equitable, or inclusive, right? So the opposite of that because you don't have a strong diversity, equity, inclusion plan doesn't mean you're not diverse. You probably are very diverse, but I think defining it is important. And I can't stress enough for us last year, when we sort of started down this road, and really we're very new. And to your point, Sharron, always evolving. And to Dori's point, it's always going to be changing and not static. But when we started this, and we were doing our operations plan at the beginning of the year. So for us, that's going to start right about now, because our fiscal year starts whenever you're just before your fiscal year starts. And making sure that those performance measures, that every single person has a performance measure related to DEI on that plan. And then we're monitoring quarterly. And at the end of this year, we were able to look back and say, we have 43 new community partners that we never, or whatever that might be, that we never had before. So you're able to measure your success. And then it gives you that boost for like, okay, we can do more this year. We can do better this year. Or we can go deeper with our community partners. But I think that, you know, defining it at your organization, developing a diversity statement, including it in your strategic plan, and having goals around it, measurable goals, is really important. One of the goals that we had this year was making sure that we had a language translator on our website, and making sure that when we had materials that were really important, like COVID vaccination, for instance, that we were able to get those translated into 12 different languages, so that our community partners could share those with the networks and individuals that they serve. And so I think, you know, just all of that wrapped up, it starts to become like a book for you that you can just keep referring to, and then it guides you. And I can't say enough about just making sure that there are measurable, accountable, somebody's accountable, not Dori, not Tracey, not Sharron, but a group of people. And we haven't done our survey yet. So we're just about to do a survey. And I'll be really interested in seeing what those results are. And Sharron, I sent you that, so you're always welcome to share that too.
Well, Tracey, thanks for sending that. And I will include that in the resources for this session. If people look down below in the app, you'll see that it's there. But also, I just wanted to kind of a couple of things that are super important here that both of you have done is, stopping and reflecting is so important. Like, we always want to go, 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 go. And Dori, this gave you an opportunity to say, oh my goodness, I was go, go, go. And we did so much. And I'm stopping and reflecting and thinking about where I want to go next, right? So you're saying this sparked a renewed spark for me in wanting to kind of move this forward. But it's a perfect time to like look back and say, what did I learn? Where do I want to take that learning from here? And same with you, Tracey, you mentioned that like, hey, we have 43 partners, community partners. Do we want to continue to build numbers of partners, or do we want to go deeper and build those relationships with the partner? Those 43, that's a huge success. What do we want, 96 or whatever, or do we want to build deeper relationships? That is so critical to kind of thinking through what the end result is and how to prioritize kind of what you're doing. So definitely you both pointed out some powerful lessons about the need to stop and reflect and really think about the objective and how to best get there. And, course correcting is fine. Like, hey, originally we thought we wanted to get as many community partners, not that this is where you're going, Tracey, but
right,
as possible. But now we realize, hey, given our capacity, human and financial resource capacity, we're going to build deeper relationships with these partners we already have, and strengthen those. And I think that's really important in the efforts to be realistic about what you can do, given kind of what your overall objective is. And so you definitely have some brilliant learnings here. I do want to kind of transition into, so if you had any action tips or strategies or anything you wanted to share with other folks that were kind of like listening here, what would your number one or two things, like say, this is the one thing I want you to know, or two things I want you to know, what would that be?
I think for me and for us, even though we are just in the early stages, I think cultural inclusion will definitely improve the company culture. And that's what's so important, is bringing everybody together, because it's also going to transition over to our clients as well. So I think that that's probably one of the most important things. And if you never get started, it's never going to happen. And so stick
100%.
with it, and you're going to make it happen.
If you never get started, it's never going to happen. That is brilliant. The time to start is now. Some people think, oh, well, that movement's passing by. And it's like, no, it's not passed by. The moment is now, and start now. Thank you. That was actually, we can walk away with that going, start now. What about you, Tracey?
I would say, initially, I was, as I said, it can be daunting. I mean, all you have to do is Google DEI and a million articles come up. And I would say, I wish I had started thinking about what it is we are doing to be diverse, inclusive, and equitable. Because I think I would have had the confidence to say, okay, we can dig a little bit deeper. Instead, I thought about a lot of the things that we needed to do, and it was giving me sort of like, oh my gosh, we're not doing enough. But in fact, we were doing a whole heck of a lot. I mean, just the fact that, we're talking with Meals on Wheels of America. I mean, what could be more diverse than delivering food to underserved, older adults that are, food insecure, malnutrition? I mean, we are already doing amazing work just by virtue of being a partner with Meals on Wheels of America. So you can feel good about that, right? And then the other thing I would say is, you do definitely, I think we were sort of trying to start a committee before we were starting at the leadership sort of team level. And that buy-in, I do think is essential, because you do need the resources, to be able to do this work. And one other point, which was, when you start talking with community partners, the reason that we had such success with community partners wasn't that we intentionally had to go to so many different partners. Once you start, it's amazing how other people start saying, let me connect you. Now that I know that you're really invested in this, let me connect you with this person. And let me connect you with that person. And it starts to flow. It just starts to happen so naturally and organically and beautifully that once that journey sort of starts, it catches on and you become sort of part of it.
I think that is an actual brilliant tip, is once people see that you're authentic and you're real, they open doors for you to kind of to enable that to happen, and it's like getting in there and doing it. And people see, wow, you really are vested in here. I can introduce you to so-and-so, or I can, have the in that community. So that's a really wonderful tip, Tracey, because a lot of organizations struggle with how to build those relationships in the community. And so just showing up and being there and being authentic and being an observer and a learner, I think is so important. And you kind of pinpointed all of those and all the information that you've shared with us today. So before we end, because we're coming to time, if there are any final thoughts that either of you have in general about this transformational journey, or giving people a pep talk to start or to continue, what would those final thoughts be?
Do it today. Get started today. You'll be so happy that you did, because I think it takes the fear. I mean, I think Dori and I both have said, we were really kind of not really sure how to get started. We wanted to do it, but it's, not Dori's words, mine. For me, it felt very daunting. It felt like so huge to take this on. And I think the other thing is to tell people when you're starting, like, I'm starting on this journey. I want you to help me help others, and bringing that sort of conversation to light. I am not a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert, and I don't profess to be when I reach out to people. What I say is, I want to learn from you, and then you can help me on this journey. And I think being vulnerable is really important.
Listen, learning is all about vulnerability, because it requires us to acknowledge what we don't know. And that can be tough sometimes, because in our society, I think we are expected to know everything. And to acknowledge that you don't know everything, that is putting yourself out there to be vulnerable. So I appreciate you sharing that, because vulnerability is a part of this, is I don't know. And also being willing to make mistakes. Learning is about, it isn't about doing everything perfectly or being the best at anything. It's about recognizing kind of where, being able to say, oh man, that was a misstep, but what did I learn from that? Where am I going to go from here? How is that helping me to go to my next level? So it's not about never making a mistake. It's about learning from those kind of mistakes or missteps or, whatever. So those are super important words, Tracey. Thank you. Dori, any kind of final thoughts or anything you'd want to share?
I think I'm just going to go with get the conversation started.
Yeah.
And everything will evolve from that.
Well, thank you. That is a really excellent way to wrap up, because we just had an amazing conversation about this whole idea of the journey of, DEI and how it can transform you as a person, and how you get excited about Dori, like, oh, I'm so excited, and Tracey, you too, and your organization, and how it's important to stay committed to that. A journey, like the ongoing journey of like personal and organizational development, it's never over, right? We should constantly be looking for ways to kind of learn and improve on what we do. So I just want to thank you so much for being part of this conversation and sharing your stories. I think we learn so much from stories and other people, the way that they perceive it, and sharing that. So I appreciate your willingness to share your personal kind of motivation, but also your organizational stories. So thank you so much. And I'm sure everyone that's watching this on the, the conference app is really going to learn a lot. And I love, Dori, behind you, what you could see on your whiteboard is opportunities, is like this word that's just flowing there. And I think
I noticed that.
Yeah, that's what that this is an amazing opportunity to kind of take some learning and take stock and think about where you are and where you might want to be. And I love the overwhelming kind of just get started, right? So thank you so much. This was amazing.
Our pleasure, my pleasure. And I loved this conversation. And one thing I can say is nothing that you will do around DEI will not be productive. It's all productive. So, so thank you for letting us have this forum for this great conversation.
It was great chatting, ladies.
Great to chat with you too.